You don't need no reason to travel. Unknown horrors leaving in plain sight. Oh, God, steal and break drives the world insane. Turn that evil darkness to healing light. Hello and welcome to Dark Loops, the Seers of Ardham, a podcast in which we, the Seers of Ardham, discuss HBO's fantastic new series, Lovecraft Country. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher from Illinois State University. Tonight we discuss episode 9, Rewind 1921. Brothers and sisters of the order, please introduce yourselves to the audience and let them know a little something about you, and we will start with Stanford.
Hi, I'm Stanford Carpenter, cultural anthropologist, coming to you out of Chicago.
Excellent. Vanessa.
I am Dr. Vanessa Hintz, licensed clinical psychologist here in the Milwaukee area, also a professor of psychology and a diversity and equity consultant.
Fantastic. Cianna.
Hi, my name is Cianna Greaves. I'm a radio producer and a podcast producer based out of Baltimore, Maryland, and Chicago, Illinois.
Fantastic. Byron.
Hi, I'm Dr. Byron Craig, and I'm assistant professor in the School of Communication at Illinois State University.
Excellent. Leandra.
Hi, I'm Leandra Parris. I'm an assistant professor of school psychology at William & Mary over here in Virginia, and I do work around peer aggression, trauma-informed schools, and social justice and school psychology.
Fantastic. Who would like to open tonight's discussion about this incredible episode? Favorite character, favorite line, favorite scene?
Can we open by saying that y'all looking casket sharp? Casket sharp.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, that's all I have.
I do all the
No, we should probably explain to the viewers the reason we're dressed this way. It for me, it was an appeal to the sacredness of this episode, and just wanting to dress in my sacred clothes. Because I'll have a lot to say about why I think this was more than just a TV episode. But that's why I wanted to dress this way. How about you, Stanford?
For me, it's all about fatherhood and memories of being a son to a father. There's something about this episode when they went back in time and they went to Tulsa, and all of a sudden all of a sudden they're dressed in ways that we've forgotten how to dress.
We have forgotten how, man.
Yeah, and just to, I gotta say, just to see that, one of my thoughts as I was watching Montrose and Tick, and even as they watched Montrose's father, who was wearing a shirt that he didn't have the tie on, but it was clearly a shirt for a tie. You know, to see that, it actually reminded me about how like growing up, and I guess I'm becoming a man of a certain age, when like a really important intimate part of growing up was having your dad teach you how to tie a tie. You know, and about how learning how to tie a tie with your dad was that moment when you realized that you could be him.
There you go. How about you, Byron?
Well, part of it was peer pressure. No, just kidding. No, but really, you know, we're talking about it. You know, one of the things, it's interesting. So this week, my brother actually sent a picture of my parents that I had never seen. Both my parents are deceased. And as we came on tonight, I was talking about growing up in church. And so that was really an important part of my life, to be around not just Black men who were dressed, you know, to the nines, but Black women who were dressed to the nines, right? And, you know, for me, this was, you know, my mother, when she would go to the grocery store, she was dressed to the nines, right? And that's just kind of for me, it's kind of paying homage to them. And that history of being around that. And plus, when I was at, you know, when I went to Morehouse, one of the things the first week of school for us, for freshmen orientation, you had to wear a tie everywhere. right? That was the experience you had. And if you were out off campus and an upperclassman saw you, a freshman, without a tie on, you'd be in big trouble. So that tradition of you know, being a Black male, being a Black person, and dressing, and we, you know, there's also a history to that, right? You dressed so you could be seen as more human as well, right? Within American culture. So with all these things you had to do. So while I don't necessarily like wearing ties and stuff now, you know, I think it's for me, it brings back a lot of memories also, you know, again, growing up in church and being around that. But real quick, but just to tie this into the show also, I think like Stanford, one of the things that got me was to see the couple who got in the car outside of the hotel, right, when they were leaving the hotel, and the grandness of that. And in a way, that's that kind of Black joy that we've seen in something like in the first episode in Chicago and at the party outside, right? And that was part of that also, which, you know, again, turned tragic very quickly. But, you know, that was us dressing to the nines.
Stunning. So
I think one thing I want to say too.
Please, go ahead.
I don't know if you'd call it a converse to the reason you all are dressed up. Chad, I've been dressing like this the whole pandemic, you know, since March of 2020. But I also think that this episode was just, I know, Sky, you called it sacred. I sort of called it haunting. That was the word I would use for it. And I think just emotionally, like, I'm just exhausted from life. And I think that this episode exacerbated that, but it's not in a negative way. Like, I'm not saying like, oh, it's too much, I don't want to watch it, but it was a lot. And so even coming to this conversation this evening, I was kind of like, I don't even know what to say, because it's like, so everything about it was just so emotionally overwhelming, like from the beginning to the end, like the entire 60 minutes, it was exhausting. So I'm going to say that I'm dressed in a relaxed fashion, because I'm just like,
right.
You know, I guess I'm allowing myself grace to just like, you know what I'm saying? Because after that episode, that's what I had to do. Like deep breathing, mindfulness, grounding. It was, I think I texted you guys like right after, like, whoa, you know what I'm saying? And I think that, I guess that's just my 2 cents from a distance for anybody watching this. Like, it's okay to not be okay after watching that episode, but just, you know, in general, 2020 is a lot, you know?
No, it is.
Yeah. So
let's do this. I'm just going to start talking about why I thought it was sacred, and then just take it from there. And stop me if it starts to sound like a master thesis or a journal article, but I was really moved at many levels by this episode. So when you look up the definition of sacred, something that is dedicated or set apart for the service of worship of a deity, that's not what I mean. Considered worthy of spiritual respect or devotion, that's not really what I mean. Or inspires awe or reverence among believers, that's what I mean, right? And particularly I'm referring to the burning scene, and I'm not going to go into any more visual detail. But sacred phenomena, these things that inspire awe and reverence in us, they have a mood of reverence, they have a respect and a mood of remembrance. And I just look at the programs in my life that I feel are sacred now. And feel free to laugh, but Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments is a sacred movie for me. Not in the sense of I watch it and I cry every time, but I watched it as a kid, and its stance on its anti-oppression stance and the dramatic way that played out is something that I watched frequently when I was very, very young, to the point where my wife and I watch it every year around Easter. And it's not so much we got to see this story again, is we have to be in this space again. We have to be in this anti-oppressive, grateful, reverent space. And then when I started looking at the haunting requiem that was written for this episode, I looked in, you know, I where'd that come from? Who wrote that? What's that all about? And composer Laura Carpenter felt strongly about what kind of music would suffice to provide a requiem for Tulsa, right? And so that was written by Carpenter, and she discussed whether or not how to do that with Mr. Green, and Mr. Green agreed. And then they got Janae Brugger to sing it. And for me, excuse me, sorry, but for me, requiems, particularly for me, Mozart's Requiem is a sacred piece. It's a piece that I encountered probably in my late teens, early 20s, wrapped around other things that were going on in my life. And there's this sense of putting yourself in a space of respect and mourning and remembrance simultaneously that certain things in our life can do. And I strongly predict that this episode will be watched by itself for years to come. People will just say, let's watch episode 9, because it does provide a requiem for Tulsa. It also provided a pseudo requiem for 2020 and for COVID. It just did something for us that no one else is doing at a large level in this country right now. So for me, it was sacred in the sense that I know that when I watch it again, and I will actually seek it out to watch it again, to be put in that state. There's a book I read called The Rings of Saturn by W.G. Sebald that is it's a testament to the destructive nature of German culture, and it's a book about the destructive nature of the human condition. And I read that or bits of it every fall as a sort of a sacred moment of, being in the season of death, moving toward winter, and just putting myself in this mindful state of remembrance, awe, and so I really do think that this episode there's just so much there, and it's going to provide that kind of space for people for a long time to come.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I want to follow up on your comment about remembrance, because one of my favorite quotes was, when my great-great-grandson is born, he will be my faith made flesh.
Yes.
Is that what she said?
Yes.
Because a lot of what I've been seeing in terms of like response to this episode is that, we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. And I think that sometimes in the midst of everything that's going on, we forget that because, we still have not achieved equity. And so I think that reminder, just that quote, that is this entire episode, but I think that quote, and sort of like what it then sort of triggered on social media with people, the responding. I think that for me, like that, when you talk about Scott, like getting to a place, I think that is a place that, while it is emotionally exhausting, I think I will find myself returning to, in terms of like remembering that even though we're not at the destination, we have, we have achieved something. You know what I'm saying? And I think that quote, it was a lot.
It was.
Yeah, I'm with you. I agree with you, Vanessa. I had that written down as probably my favorite line from the episode, for a number of reasons. But like you said, for this notion of remembrance, but also for me, it was really that telling of that story of that line for me led that episode into this whole notion of the poem and of the requiem, right? Mm-hmm. This kind of notion of, having to fight in this past and still having to fight in this present. And in light of that, for us who are here now thinking about their future also, and still thinking about, this, and I take it beyond just the bearing of children, but that kind of, seeing that faith turn to flesh, that faith of struggle also, that struggle and that fight for equity and full equality, and that turning also into that flesh. So that I think that's where I probably started crying in this episode, was when she said that, and I didn't recover until after the show ended, probably for like an hour. I was telling Scott that my partner and I, what we'll do is we'll call one another when it's starting and then text throughout. I don't think we can even text that much for this episode. It's just at the end, he called and said, I'm really on the brink here. And I said, well, I've been on the brink since she said that line. And it just made me think about, our faith in many different levels, whatever that faith is, right? I mean, I grew up in church. Like I've said earlier, I don't go to church anymore, but there's still this faith that I have. I'm always trying to figure out what that faith is for me. And how that leads. And I'm a firm believer that this leads to, there's something of the flesh that comes from all of this faith, right? Be it through, my nephews and nieces and what I can impart on them, or through the thoughts that I have and the fights that I, that we all deal with to create this equity that we want. But
I mean, the scenes that moved me, and I think that what was interesting about this episode is, and keep in mind, I've been critical of Montrose for the entire series. This really made me rethink Montrose's character. It pulled out some of the things, some of the things I've talked about that I thought were interesting about Montrose's character, and it really started to dig into those, like his whole relationship to Tick. I mean, I have a particular soft spot for people who have chosen to be parents to children that were not biologically theirs, because of the role that it's played in my family. And so that was really interesting. And I hate to say it, not only did I have a fuller appreciation for Montrose, is that I found Tick's reaction to a lot of this to be even more troubling in terms of Tick, right? It's like you have confirmation that this man raised you with the full knowledge that it was likely that you were born from his brother and his wife being together, right? And the first thing he did was think about himself. like it was just like, oh, the moment when you realize how much growing Tick has to do, right? But the moment, I think that the moment when I actually did start to cry during this, it was when they were looking at the place where Montrose and Thomas were together, and Montrose is talking to Tick, and he says, and he's talking about what he didn't tell anyone else, and he said, "I lost that boy's name. Couldn't even say it before today. You see, he couldn't just be dead. He had to never exist. That was the only way I could go on and not die here with him. I could save him now. I can save him." And to me, that moment brought out so much, and so much, not just about, I mean, it is about dealing with his trauma around his sexuality, but it also brings out a lot of issues having to do with the trauma that one experiences being African American and growing up in predominantly white spaces, and the decisions and the compromises that you make in the moment just to kind of keep it going, just to move on, and about how moving forward in the wake of trauma is about forgetting, right? Forgetting, and then reaching a moment, hopefully in your life, where you can remember, right? Mm-hmm. All of that, it just brought all of that together in such a powerful way. And then to see Tick respond with being worried about whether he was gonna survive if Montrose fixed the situation, and Montrose's response, right? He's my other favorite quote. Thomas won't mean much. He's just the first in a long list of sacrifices I made to be your father. And then to continue on and to say, I cut out all the soft parts of myself to be a man because men have sons. You were my son. You had to be. I did it all and I would do it again because the only thing I ever wanted was to be your father. So it can't change. And to see that type of, first of all, just for him to be so resolute, but it also speaks to what it is to strive to be a father in when you're literally surrounded by toxic masculinity. This idea that he had to cut out all the soft parts of himself to be a father. And there are generations that grew up that way, generations of parents who parented that way. And to be a parent who is, assuredly not about that, right? But to still be able to recognize that was really powerful to me. And also the way, and I also like the way it contextualized the abuse, right? That he wasn't just, that it wasn't about Atticus being soft. It was about him feeling like all the soft parts had to be cut out of himself and out of Atticus to create a man. Mm-hmm. And so there's a tragedy in that for me. I could go on and on and on, but that was actually one of the core moments of this episode that really hit me hard.
I want to comment on the line you just mentioned. He's just the first in a long list of sacrifices I made to be your father. First of all, that line isn't a compliment, isn't an insult. It's a beautifully ugly truth. And Atticus can take it the way he takes it, but everybody's suffering is in that line. Montrose' suffering, Montrose' happiness to be able to be a father, Atticus' suffering, happiness, it's all there. And then when you think what the writers had to do to get to that point to have it matter. So usually in sci-fi, you have a time machine and people travel and you see crazy creatures and, oh, that was cool. But here, I think every therapist might love to have a time machine and be able to show a client the traumatized person who traumatized them. I don't know, but I think that in this weird time machine space, Atticus gets to see a side of his father that words would have never sufficed to explain. Montrose could have explained, this is exactly what happened. By the way, I don't know if you remember back in the early episodes, there's a moment where he's talking to Atticus, and I don't know if it's George and Atticus, but he says something like, yeah, George and I swinging those bats in Tulsa. And that's not what happened. Atticus is the one who swung the bat, right? So Montrose did reorganize his memories about that event. But to use sci-fi in this way that I've never seen it used before, maybe there's a couple shows that tried it, but this one just nailed it. Where the son gets to see his father's past as they both sit there and talk about the present, their current present. I just thought that was, first of all, it worked at an emotional level, but it was also a major writing achievement. And it almost felt as if all the trauma we've seen Atticus produce in people's lives, all this trauma we've seen Montrose produce in people's lives, all of it was for that moment to explain what it's like to be Black living in these spaces generation after generation. I hats off. One of the best moments I've seen, period, on writing, acting, and getting everything there to make that happen. It was just blew me away.
Yeah,
I think something. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Byron. Go ahead.
Oh no. Well, I was just saying, I like that, but I also really like the way it works back and forth. And although Letty isn't a part of, is not necessarily a part of that family, we also get to see this trauma of Black womanhood also, though. And I think that's important as well, because it is the grandmother who I think has to make that ultimate sacrifice there, right?
Yep.
With, handing over the book of names, but also knowing that she is dying for a really important reason, right? And that she is giving this thing over knows that Letty, and she knows Letty's going to live, right? And, you know, I think the moment when they let go of hands, because that hand won't burn until she lets go of Letty's hand, because Letty has the spell over herself. For me, it was just like this moment of understanding the true sacrifice of what was her name? Grandmother Hattie, right? That was her name, right? That true sacrifice of this woman, to ensure that a lineage carries on, right? And at the same time, seeing how Montrose is having to not only deal with the trauma of his, you know, his sexual orientation and everything that came with that, but also having to deal with that trauma of Tulsa, right? I think I just didn't want to say the word because that episode was so hard. Honestly, was really hard for me to watch. I mean, it was really difficult for me to watch. But to see, I mean, the way they pieced this going back and forth between the house and Montrose dealing with, you know, with all the trauma he had to deal with from Tulsa, from, you know, just being a part of that historical tragedy, but also his own sexual orientation and this notion of what manhood is supposed to mean, right? Because we're grappling with that also. I mean, I think that's something else they did brilliantly, was make us grapple. But well, what does it mean, you know, what does this manhood, this masculinity mean, right? But also looking at going back and forth with, you know, with Letty and grandmother Hattie, and dealing with that also, and this kind of having to, you know, being able to let go of her, this woman having to let go of her life so her future generations could survive, right? So she could heal those future generations. So, you know, it dealt with that, you know, these notions of gender, really, you know, I think in a way that we also haven't seen a lot of, right? And gender specifically in this moment of tragedy, in this moment of white domestic terrorism, right? You know, how does Black gender deal with this, right?
I think what this episode did for me, it definitely cleared up a lot of my feelings about Atticus. I mean, this was an episode about survival, and it was a really interesting and brutally honest look at what it means to be the child of a survivor, and what it means to grow up in that space where the grief of your parents really does take up all the oxygen and all the room, when you're constantly at the mercy of their trauma and their grief and their paranoia, and they're being so overprotective of you. And I think that's what it really lays out here, that, you know, at the end of the day, Montrose, George, and I keep forgetting the mother's name, I'm sorry, Dora. Were survivors.
Right.
And Montrose did the best that he could with the weight of the trauma that he had to carry. And you see this, you know, a lot with, you know, children of Holocaust survivors, and, you know, children of parents who have suffered, you know, really harrowing trauma, and it is passed on. And that is part of the Black experience. You do have a thread of depression, a thread of physical abuse, sternness, that runs generation to generation through generation of the Black family. And I think a lot of that is brought out of the trauma that our parents and our grandparents and our ancestors have experienced being Black in America. And I think for the first time in a long time, I've sort of understood the frustration that Atticus has, you know, felt towards Montrose. And it was really, really touching. And just sort of living in that shadow of not just trauma, but that, weight of expectation It's pretty incredible, and I think this episode did a really, really great job of laying that out. Yeah.
It did.
And I think we keep talking about, using the word trauma. And I think something that you said, Stanford, in terms of like pushing through trauma is about forgetting. And I agree 100%. I also think that, part of trauma-informed care is working with someone who has experienced trauma to rewrite their narrative in a way that sort of puts them in control. Yeah. And I think that that is another thing that I think was powerful about this, because you saw Montrose physically, like, say he could rewrite his story, like, actually, you know what I'm saying? Like, for real, use that term loosely. And, like that, when you said, Scott, that like, sometimes therapists wish they had a time machine to show people things. I think that it's an interesting notion, because again, like, just existentially, like, he had the opportunity to change the narrative. Grandma Hattie had the opportunity to change the narrative. Letty had to come into contact with people she knew were gonna die. And just like, you have the power to change this narrative. And so like, that power is simultaneously empowering. And oh my gosh, power is empowering. It's both like a positive thing, but also overwhelmingly, like, it's overwhelming. And so I think that that's part of, I think, coping with trauma is like, you have all the power to change it, but you also have none of the power to change it. You know what I'm saying? Because you can change the way you relate to it, but you can't change what happened to you. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that that's another thing that, again, this episode did well to manifest in terms of, at all these different points, you hear Atticus like, we can't change anything. And then, everyone else has these separate points where they could physically, you know what I'm saying? And just that, to me, that was another thing that was very heavy about the episode, is like, if I were Letty, could I stand next to that woman while she died? Could I stand in a house with these people knowing they're gonna die? I don't know. I really just don't know. You know what I'm saying?
That was actually, I think, my favorite part was Letty in this whole episode, because she chooses to tell the sister, yeah, you're going to be fine, knowing that that's not the case. She's kind of in this moment with her grandma. She could have left. Like, she could have left the house. She didn't have to stay there and bear witness to that, but she did. And I thought that was such a powerful decision on her part, to just stand there and say, I'm going to stand witness. I'm going to watch this happen. I'm going to honor that. And it almost cost her everything. But I think it was important that she had, I think what Vanessa was saying, sort of that power to say, this is going down. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to hold her hand until I can't hold her hand anymore. And then I'm going to walk through a bunch of damn bombs with my head held high. And I'm going to save the world. And I just feel like that whole, I think what you were saying, Vanessa, too, about taking that power and having it, using it in any way that you can. And there's a lot of opportunities to create a new normal. And that's what we all want when we experience trauma, a new normal. We don't want this to be our normal. And I have to say, I gained a lot of respect for Montrose, too, when he, Atticus says, you better be sure, Pop. And so he doesn't. He actually proves in that moment that you're right. Like, I'm not willing to not be your father. He won't take that risk. And so I just feel like there were a lot of character arcs that it changed how I viewed them. Even Atticus, like, I don't know if anyone else felt this way, but I kind of felt like when his dad said that, he kind of almost said, you know what, like, you better be certain, Pop. Like, he gave him back that situation. He gave him the ability to make the decision on whether or not he was going to risk it all to save Thomas. And I felt like that was him kind of reconciling the issues that we've been seeing with him up to that point. Maybe that's wishful thinking, because again, that's what I wanted to see. But I just felt like there was just so many, I don't know.
Well, hearing you talk about Atticus, this was the first time that Atticus's violence was praised. In other words, he saved basically his father and his uncle and his mother. And what I loved about it is, we've seen Atticus be violent. and violent, and it makes us, puts this anti-violence vibe in us. And if this is controversial, I'm sorry, but violence was exactly what was needed in that moment. Those kids needed to be saved, and they needed to be saved through violence. And so there's even a place for that. I think all that was done very much on purpose, to 8 episodes of him being violent, and it doesn't fit. And all of a sudden, episode 9, penultimate episode, boom, it fits. And he saves his family, right? But this idea that, I think I said what I wanted to say, right? That violence does have a place, and we get stuck talking about whether or not it's right or wrong. And I think that gets us into dangerous spaces, because you're usually not in that space where someone used violence when you're calling it wrong. You're usually in a much safer space. So I very much appreciated they gave the character of that space to actually be rewarded for being violent, and to be honored for being violent, dare I say, because that shit needed to happen. That's just, some could say you should have been peaceful, but I don't.
Not in that situation.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Right, yeah. And also, how many of us want to go back and save our parents? Like, I would give anything to go back and, like, be the person, like, to be able to go back and, like, be the one who does that and put that, make it come full circle. Because he's that person because of what they did, good or bad, right or wrong. He's who he is because of them, and he ultimately ends up being the one who saves them. I think that is a beautiful, I don't know what you call it. I don't have the words because it's too late at night. But sorry, Stanford, I think you were saying something.
Vanessa, do you have your hand up there?
I have a question, but you go ahead, Stanford. You might answer it, because the question was for you, actually, but you might just answer it.
Well, to me, what I also loved is are all the ways in which they led up to it. Like, starting in the first episode with the first dream of Jackie Robinson coming in and beating back the monster and saying, "I got you, kid." Mm-hmm. And then having the episode where you've got Dee, and she has, and all the adults are just so self-involved that they're not paying attention to what she's doing. And what does she do? She puts on a Chicago American Giants, a Negro League baseball cap, and she puts it on like armor, right? And she basically runs. She's running the entire episode, right? And then and running from base to base to base to base, and then that ends, and then we go to Tulsa, and Tick picks up the bat, and he beats back the monsters, right?
Yep. He
beats back the monsters, saves the kids, but also in beating back the monsters and saving the kids, that very excursion being successful is also about saving Dee, right? And I just find it really interesting that they used, not interesting, I love that they used baseball as a metaphor, because I also love the Jackie Robinson story. I love that he was brought into baseball, into Major League Baseball, integrating Major League Baseball. But they said but one thing that was interesting that we don't talk enough about is it was acknowledged when they brought him in that he wasn't the best Negro League baseball player, that there were plenty of better players that they could have brought in. They brought him in because they felt that he had the best temperament in order to survive being the only one, right? And I felt like understanding that element of it, that like Jackie Robinson wasn't just the first Black man to integrate Major League Baseball. He was one of many amazing Black baseball players, and in fact, he wasn't necessarily the best of them, and but he was of them. And I thought that was really interesting to see, because it's, like I said, I've always, Tick is not the character I've warmed up to, but it was really interesting to see him essentially propelled forward by all of these other people to then pick up the bat, go in and fight back the monsters and just say, "I got you, kid."
Did that answer your question, Vanessa?
It did not, but it kind of it was kind of a good segue, because I'm with Leandra and I'm so biased. about Tick. Stanford, do you think that sort of scene and him fighting off the monsters with the bat, does that have the elements to be like the beginning of his like redemption arc story? Like, is there enough there? Is that enough?
They have to address Korea.
Okay.
I do agree.
I got it.
I'm a little nervous because next week is the last episode and we're not talking about it and nobody knows. I mean, they have to address it. They have to talk about it.
Yeah, if they don't address Korea directly in this last episode, I'm going to be asking myself forever, then why the hell did they go to Korea in the first place?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, I don't know. There's something else extremely memorable about this show that happened in social media. And someone asked Misha Green about the Two-Spirit murder.
I saw that.
And she said, I got it wrong.
Yeah.
When the hell have you ever heard a writer say, I got it wrong? Jesus Christ, we get an 8th season of Game of Thrones that's utter trash. And all they do is throw cans at people and say, well, go write your own show. I mean, they couldn't just fess up. And for a writer of a thing with this much money behind it, I mean, let's face it, there's just a lot of money in this to say in public, I got that wrong. What I call that is the power of courage. I mean, for her to come out and say that changes the world in which we interpret writers. And when D&D from Game of Thrones, when they retreat into narcissism and hate and, oh, that's your problem, that influences how we think about writers. And for her to come out and say, I got it wrong, it's this wonderful expression of, I'm going to call it play. In other words, I really, really tried to do well at this. And okay, that didn't work, but I get season 2. In other words, it's for me, it was just culturally delightful to see not just a Black female author, but an author period, a writer period, come out and say, yeah, I did my best and that didn't work. I was blown away. For me, that's as important as stuff going on the show. That changes culture. That changes what we think about writers. And it goes back to the notion of retelling stories. And I loved it. So I don't know that I didn't see a question about Korea, but I was blown away. My respect for her went through the ceiling when she did that, because she's just changed the world for a whole bunch of people.
I will say, when Montrose was like, you're just the first in a long line of sacrifices I made to be your father, that was the first thing I thought about, was the degree to which that was another one of those sacrificing, a piece of your soul, like what, because maybe he thought he was protecting him. I'm not sure, but I did enjoy the article that you sent, and it was kind of, I think it helped me not expect to see that person to come back unless they do bring them back in the next season, I guess. I don't know what they'll do. I've been expecting them to come back, like for them to bring them back.
I don't know. There's another character I want to talk about real quick.
Yeah.
The commitment to suffering and witnessing suffering, and the commitment to family, and Montrose being able to have his son watch what he went through to become his father, right? That's something that Christina will never have in an eternity of firsts, right? And this quest for an eternity of firsts is an adolescent daydream, right? That I'll never get bored. I'll be ahistorical, and all I'm going to do is have fun and fun and fun. And her saying that line last week just kind of went by, an eternity of firsts. We didn't think about it much, but this is what you lose when that's how you live your life. You lose history. You lose what I would call the beautifully ugly aspects of being part of a family. As a parent, I've tried to stay away from trying to say those things as if they're somehow principles of the human condition, right? You've got to have a kid so you can understand yourself. I try to stay away from that. I do know that there are things I've discovered about myself that I really don't like. And there are things about myself that I do like that I would not have known if I hadn't been a parent. And I talk about these things freely with my kids. Letty's sitting there in this woman's worst moment of pain, watching her have this sacrifice, go through this sacrifice. These are things that lead to depth that, at least now I'm talking as if it's a principle, but The life that Christina's after is not this life. It's a life of individualistic, childish Peter Pan. Nothing ever gets old. And I just love that she said that clearly last episode. And then we saw this play out so fully and humanly this episode. I think that was all on purpose. This is really well done. I wasn't supposed to stop the conversation, you know.
It's okay. I just have a question. So at the beginning of the episode, they call her in, and she's like, Lancaster has to remove this spell, and they're like, oh my God, he's dead. And then the next scene, she goes to talk to him, and they're like, please help save him. And she's like, no. But she could have saved him so he could save Dee, but she didn't because of whatever Peter Pan fantasy she has. And I was kind of like, oh. So that was right, like that, all that happened. Like she could have saved him, and he could have, would he? Probably not, because he's terrible. He could have saved Dee, but I don't know, that when William came in, and so I was like, oh, this is wild. So I just want to make sure I was understanding correctly.
Right. And that look on William's face when Lancaster does die of just like pure like, oh, look at that. It happened. It was just very, I mean, that whole situation anyway, just where they're using black bodies to keep him alive. And I still can't decide, is he a white person using black bodies to keep himself going? Or like,
I think he's a black person he's a white person using black bodies to keep himself going, because he makes this comment, he does make this comment about how we're running out of ways to keep it covered up. And they also
said we can't go out and get another black body, right? So they're harvesting black bodies, and you're right, engrafting the skin onto him.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood what was happening there.
That scene you mentioned with William watching him die. That's one of her eternity of firsts. You know, it's all these things that she has to experience. And I swear to God, the acting in that scene on William's face, I could have swore it was Christina. I didn't look like Christina, but the face, the expression was totally Christina watching this guy die. I can't imagine how many times they did that take just to get that right, so you could see Christina through his face. It was stunning. There were so many good things about this episode. Just that little teeny moment. And then he died in a very disgusting way. But he's gone. Absolutely.
I have a question. Ruby, when she turns the gas off that is keeping Del alive, and she makes the comment of, when I imagine myself as a white woman, I always imagine myself as a redhead. Is she saying, let's get us another white woman? Or is she putting an end to this whole magical romp with Christina? Because she asked Christina some, pretty tough point blank. And I think if Ruby was under any illusion, I think she's pretty hip to the fact that Christina is in fact trash. And it's a relationship that is going to go nowhere, and it's all about Christina. So what do you guys think that meant? Do you think that she plans to continue with the shape-shifting, or do you think that she's now turning her attentions to snuffing out Christina and putting an end to all of this?
I think it's all of the above.
Yeah, she's going to kill her as a redhead.
I think she wants to be. I think she wants it. She wants to see what it's like to have a different body. I think that she wants all of that. But what I think is interesting is she made it very crystal clear. She doesn't give a rat's behind about whether Tick lives or dies.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm about my sister surviving. I am about me surviving. And you all can deal with your own BS. And you know what? She's also about Dee and Hippolyta. But it's clear she has no love for Tick. He's just this guy who gets his sister in trouble and is probably going to get his sister killed. And he compares him to all of men who like her mom was involved with.
Yeah, she's not impressed at all.
Yeah.
No.
And I think what's interesting about her relationship with Christina is she knows it. She's totally got Christina's number.
Mm-hmm.
She's just decided that she can get what she wants, and she can get her pleasure through Christina and get other things that she wants. And that's, and I think for her, it's building up to, hey, it was real. It was fun. I laughed. I cried. Now I got to get rid of you.
Yeah.
Oh, and
I
Byron.
agree. I think she's going to use her the same way a white woman was, you know what I mean? Like a white woman's going to use me. I'm going to use her for what I can get. Like
Which I think is great. I mean, Christina definitely exploited her, and she's going to exploit her the same way. And I thought that between Ruby and Letty was pretty much like, she's going to kill Ted. And Ruby just was like, all right, girl, see you later.
Got things to do, man. I think she's going to put Christina on ice and actually turn herself into Christina.
And just left with Christina. I thought that was pretty great because Letty was standing there like, okay.
All she's got to do is learn the spell that allows her to take Christina's blood.
I don't
And
know
she can take Christina's place.
That would be an interesting end with her shape-shifting between herself and Christina.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's something else with Ruby, though. I think there's more. Because first, I don't see Ruby stopping at just shifting into a woman, into a white woman. I think if she's I think there's more that she would probably want to get the power of a white man. Also, I think she would want to experience that. So I just think there's going to be something really, really more. I think it's going to be something more interesting about Ruby. So is this going to be do we know if there's going to be another season to this? Earlier you were saying in the second season. Is there going to be another season?
I haven't seen it announced yet. I don't know. Okay.
I just assumed.
Is this episode Sunday just going to be an hour long or whatever? Maybe it'll be an hour and a half. I don't know, but I just think there's something else that Ruby's going to do in this next episode. To Christina, I think that if, and I'm, I don't know, I could be completely wrong, but I just think Ruby is going to do something to save Tick.
Okay, what if she kills Christina, takes her blood, turns herself into Christina, goes into the ceremony and kills everybody, all the other people that are bound to be there, the brothers of the whatever. So she'll get in there. It'll be the moment, the big reveal that she's actually Ruby. That would be pretty friggin' cool.
I don't know. I think I might be putting too much into that character, into how they're developing Ruby, but it just seems like I don't know. It seems to me like there's something that she is going to do, that she's up to, that she's masterminding now.
I feel like she's masterminding something. She is planning something that will contribute to Christina's end, but I'm still thinking that Gia is going to be the one to save Atticus. I mean, if she's still knocking about Chicago, I mean, what is she doing? I mean, surely they brought her back for more than.
Well, she's going to seduce William and rip him apart. That's. I don't know.
And now Hippolyta is half woman, half droid, which was awesome.
Oh my God, we need a new motherboard. Oh my God. When she said I need a new motherboard, she showed her wrist. I was listening for P-Funk in the background, right?
Oh yeah.
How cool they brought that in. I mean, that was something else also, to have Hippolyta come back and to be that motherboard. I mean, the way, the power that she has to open it and then to keep that portal open for so long, for me, it's just another example of the way the writer is writing this power into women is just phenomenal for me. And to see her, how she has to keep that, all the energy she has to use and the strength she has to use, and I kind of tie that back into the strength of grandmother Hattie, and this kind of phenomenal strength of these women throughout this show. I thought it was just brilliantly written. you know, one of the Facebook things that one of the Facebook groups that I'm on. Oh, never mind. I won't say that.
Okay.
Because
I quickly wanted to.
I want to hear it.
They're great. Those people on that post are great. Well, it's just, you know, some people, a friend of mine had to remind me that there are a lot of younger people on there because I was reading a lot of posts, like a lot of posts that were talking about, what is this Tulsa thing? And I was like, ugh. But I had to remember that people aren't learning about this in school, right? About the Tulsa riot, about any of those, acts of domestic terrorism in the 20s. People aren't, you know, they don't teach that. They're not learning that in history classes. So it was just frustrating. But I thought I was like, well, they're missing this point of the you know, the beauty of this sacrifice. Yeah. You know, going back to the sacrifice that grandmother Hattie was making, but it's also kind of that sacrifice that Hippolyta was making also by you know, that energy she had to use to keep that portal open. And I'm not so, you know, I guess at the end I was like, is she even going to survive this into the next episode? Because it seems like it took so much out of her. And I know she's traveled, you know, she's used the multiverse, but you know, she did so much for Dee in that episode. It was just very powerful for me. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Sam. I'm sorry.
I mean, much to the contrary of what we were led to believe. I think, you know, she came back, and I think that, and I don't think that her exerting herself to the limits of her ability means that she's over. I mean, I thought what was interesting is to watch her hair turn blue. Yeah, she is becoming the image of her daughter's hero. And it's happening gradually in all these little changes. But I mean, one of my other favorite quotes in this was at the very beginning, was when Ruby looks at everyone and is like, "Stop pointing fingers. You all are to blame. Now, how do we fix this?" Referring to Dee. Like, and what I thought was really interesting about that moment is they took one of the most like banal sequences, right? And used it to launch such an amazing story, which is mom coming home and realizing the babysitter's done gone screwed up.
Yeah.
And having had my first job as a babysitter, I can relate to that, right? But yeah, that really got me. Like, it was like she got home and she's like, you were supposed to watch her.
Because she was healthy when I left.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought it was great when you see the scene when she's like, we're going to the observatory and Dee is in the car.
Yeah.
She puts Dee in the car because she's going to take Dee with her.
Yeah.
What you do when you...
And then they're like,
can't trust the baby
child.
It's like,
with me, yeah.
I can't leave her with you guys.
No, exactly.
Oh my goodness. There was something else in that scene that I wanted to talk about, but I don't remember what it was.
While you think about it, that thing where Ruby was like, y'all can point fingers at each other, I wanted to be like, you were off having sex with someone. Like, why are you?
Why aren't
Sorry.
you?
I just like, that was my first moment of like, Ruby, really? But, you know, it's fine.
Yeah.
Hey, Ruby was the original babysitter, though, wasn't she?
She was. She was the one who's supposed to be taking care of her. And she
was the original.
She's covering up, getting the story straight.
Was this an error, or did I miss something? Is the observatory in Mayfield, Kansas, or Kentucky?
Kentucky. I thought it was in Kansas.
I thought it was in Kansas as well.
So either it was a different observatory.
Oh, that's interesting.
Or Hippolyta changed reality, and now it's in Kentucky.
Okay.
Right, because she said, I'm on Earth 504, which means there are other Earths. So I want to quickly, Byron, this point you made about Ruby not being done testing her power, right? We could see sort of, you know, you've got Hippolyta in this science fiction-y time machine domain where she plays, but she doesn't get overwhelmed by playing. She has a mission. And if Ruby's got a mission, we could see her going through this kind of playing with her new power the way Hippolyta played with hers. I just thought, well, of course, Ruby's going to do more than just become one other person. Hell, she might even become something other than a person, right? I mean, there's all kinds of degrees of freedom here. And oh yeah, why haven't I thought about Ruby that way? I just thought that was kind of an interesting point.
Yeah. Hey,
And you all were talking about, I'm sorry, go ahead, Byron.
Oh, no, go ahead, Vanessa.
I think just to talk about Hippolyta too, like, I don't know if y'all felt it, but when she walked in, like when she returned, I was like, ooh, like I got scared. I was like,
Yeah.
I get it.
You guys
she walked in, she had the look, and it was just like, but that was when she walked in, I shouted out loud. I was like, ah, like just the fact that she came in with a purpose, and she, like you said, she got shit done. Like she was like, we're doing this. And again, I think it was one of those instances, like to Byron's point, like the strength of women. But I would argue too, like Black women always we gotta get shit done. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, I got it. Like, don't worry, I got it. But that look she had when she walked in, I was like, I was scared for them.
Oh, she didn't even say hello. She said D-Sec. I was like, oh. Oh, wow.
She should have realized she can throw them into any dimension she wants to, right? And they're never coming back.
She says it, when she's about to, Jack and the Trident King. She says, she's lived 205 or however many years on Earth, whatever, and she traveled the universes, and she's going to use all of her power and all of her knowledge to save her child. Yeah. So, she's pretty amazing.
I mean, that's the whole reason she came back, because she said D needs me, right? So.
Mm-hmm. I think everything was just so intertwined so nicely in this episode for me. I mean, even from, I had to admit, one of my, I had a couple of favorite scenes, and, it was hard for me to pick just one favorite scene, but, there was even something about the scene. This is, before, I was completely just glued to the television when Montrose was standing in the window of the hotel and narrating the story of Tulsa and the victims. I mean, that was just absolutely, I hate to use this word, but
Williams, just,
yeah.
I mean, oh.
Yeah. I mean, that was just beautifully done for such a tragic moment in history. And B, he needs to get nominated for an Emmy Award for that. I mean, that was absolutely beautiful scene. But I have to say, in this one, I mean, it was surprising to me. But I've watched this episode probably around 7 times now. I keep the scene. One scene that really gets me is, I think it's interesting that we see Letty when the white truck comes around the corner and the white guy jumps out the truck and he says, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a nigger by his toe, right? He starts shooting at Letty. It's just, for me, it's wonderful to get to see her run again.
Yes.
It's become such a theme for her, right? And she takes off, and it's just, beautiful to see her running. But then when you juxtapose that to the end, when she's walking through the bombing and through all the mayhem that's going on in the street, I thought that was just really beautiful. And I don't know why I'm placing those two scenes together yet, but it's just something about those two scenes, to see her running like that, but then to see her walking at the end when she, I think she is traumatized, but she's come to terms with, that she's protected also. I don't know. It's just, I'm not sure. I haven't worked through it yet. So.
She should have been running. I was kind of like, girl, you gotta pick up.
She also just went through this incredibly spiritual event, right?
Yeah.
And I think poetically they were just trying to show reverence for what had just happened, and she's walking with that reverence. And Byron, you've kept using the word supernatural, and I'm in that space, and I want to almost call it more like a reverence space. It's about that moment, but there's also something timeless about the sacrifice that Letty witnessed, and she carries herself that way. I got the running scene with her what I loved about it is they're shooting. I didn't love it, but what I thought they did was they're shooting at her and she's running, and then who comes out the door and shoots back at them? But Montrose's father. So
Right.
we just saw Montrose beating his son, you know, and the next time we see him, he's protecting Letty. And I just love that juxtaposition, you know, Vanessa, as you said, and, right? This and this. And I just love the fact that they let that happen. I'm sure they had that happen on purpose. When his neighbor came out and started shooting in the same plane, I thought, wait a minute, you guys got to work this and make sure you don't hurt each other because you got those guns fired so close. But I thought that George's father came out and said, I got one for each of you. Oh man, that you just instantly think about him differently. And then it's like, what, wait, well, and I like when they do that to you.
But
And I love the Black family armed to the teeth.
Yes.
I thought that was a fantastic and incredibly powerful scene. There was a gun for everybody, and everybody knew how to use one.
Yeah.
Well, it's not just, I mean, the other thing I thought was interesting about that is thinking back to when we first see Verton, Montrose's dad, right? Where he's beating Montrose and Dora comes out and stands in front to protect Montrose. And then Dora's dad comes out and says, Verton, you chastise your boys how you like, but mine, you leave her be. Like that moment was really interesting because it was just like you saw it was like the drawing of the line.
Yeah.
It was like and then to have it followed up by that scene where they're both shooting together to protect Letty, and they both retreat to Dora's father's house, right? And they're not sitting around there critiquing each other's parenting, and they're not critiquing what each other did. They're like, all right, we may got our differences, but we got to worry about them out there now. You know, and I thought that was like, to me, that was a quintessentially Black moment.
Yes. And it didn't require any words. They just knew. Bing, bang, boom. It was fantastic.
Yep.
And we were talking about people getting all the awards. Journey Smollett, I don't know if you all saw, but in that fire scene, she actually got burned. Like the actress. Yeah, there was a picture of her in a hospital. And she said when she was doing that fire scene, like holding hands in the fire got too close, but she finished the scene and then ran off of set screaming because she got burned. And then the directors were like, girl, go home. But it's just like, I don't know. I love Journey Smollett. You know, I love her since forever, since Eve's Bayou. But when I read that, I was like, dang, this show is tight. Like this is just so awesome.
It is. Yeah.
I think it's like Scott said at the beginning. I think for me, you know, I was watching, I was writing down how would I use this show, and I really kept thinking this is an episode I would use from this show as a standalone, as a rhetorical artifact to study and think about. You know, what is the message in this episode? Because there's so much there that I think I could use it alone to write about it, to teach it as a rhetorical artifact that actually, even in the episode itself, what happens in an episode creates or demands response, right? But the episode overall demands a response also, right? And that, I mean, it creates this notion of, I was actually writing about it at Stanford, and I actually started going back to the Afrocentric ideal in Nomo, right? And I was like, you know, this is an episode that, you know, that it's about these, you know, the last couple of episodes have been about this whole thing about this book of names, right? And this notion of naming. And I can't wait to see what actually happens with that, right? And the way Letty is, when she's walking through all that bombing and stuff, and the book is so, you know, she secures that book so safely, right? Because these names are in there, this book of names, right? And you know, I think, you know, whatever that book of names is going to do, right? In naming everything that happens, right? You know, this episode makes us think about Tulsa, but, you know, racial inequality, but more so, you know, this kind of domestic violence, right? I mean, not domestic violence, I'm sorry, domestic terrorism, right? And all this kind of, this terrorism that's been done on Black bodies, you know, throughout, you know, our time here in this country. But just this episode, I think in itself just becomes this visual artifact to use and to be able to get, Scott, this is going to go towards you for a second, to think about this notion of, is this the type of thing that you can use to produce empathy? Because it's such a hard episode to watch. I mean, that first night, watching it the first time, you know, this episode was like, how long? Like, was it like
a little over an hour?
Was it? It wasn't over an hour. It was under an hour.
Was it under? I thought it was an hour and 4 or something like that.
No, this was one of the shorter episodes.
I think it was like 56 minutes. Maybe?
Yeah.
All right.
Something like that. But it was just, it was so hard to watch. But I kept thinking, is this the kind of thing you need to do to people to make them understand when we talk about the necessity of having diversity and inclusion training, or to change policies and institutions, that this is not something new, right? This is based, this trauma and this violence is something that comes from a moment like that, right? Yeah. And I want to use the term, is this the kind of thing you have to use to beat people over the head to get them to understand, right? This is this history of violence in America, right? And we know it goes far back from that, you know, before that, but you know, something that, you know, I think as a media artifact, it just does a beautiful job, right? You know, it takes this spectacle and it makes it a beautiful teaching moment to me. I think it creates a moment possibly where you can create a moment of empathy also, and someone who doesn't understand that trauma and that intergenerational trauma. Just back to the scene with Montrose looking out that window, the fire and the reflection, and all the devastation going on out there, and just his, I mean, that narrative the narration that he does in that scene, it was just so powerful. I mean, I was just losing it. Because it was so real. I mean, it took you there. It took you to the other names. And I haven't looked up yet if any of those, the people's names that he talked about were actual, victims of the acts. But I mean, if they were, that would be really, really interesting. And something, and I need to look that up because there's something inside of me is telling me that they probably might be real. These could have been real people.
I would bet they are. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, that scene just stood out so much to me, you know, that we're actually hearing these, you know, these names of these people.
And the portal,
hearing the book of names.
And the portal was fluctuating at the wall behind him, right? I mean, everything right in that space. Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? Line, character, scene? Anything we haven't touched on?
Well, this is totally random, but just like as a, you know, horror nerd, that sort of like exorcism scene, whoo, I loved it. It was just so like classic horror, and then her I just love it. Would have been better if Christina wasn't there, but it's okay that she had to be there, you know, like she had to be a part of it. She just like, whatever. But it gave me like super Exorcist, like the Power of Christ tells you type vibes.
Totally.
And I loved every second of The Exorcist. Is one of my favorite scary movies. So,
to be honest, I think there was a little lost potential by making that scene so short. Yes. I mean, the things that speaking in tongues that could have had her doing that happens during possessions could have been very powerful. And they had more time. It was only 56 minutes, you know. I love that scene, and I thought, oh my God, what an image! And I thought they were going to do the whole bed thing and everything, and they cut it kind of short as far as I was concerned. But no, it's really, really good.
I also really liked when they just arrived at the Stratford Hotel, I believe it was called, and you see two beautiful girls walking upset that their prom was canceled.
Mhm.
And one of the girls uses the terms "ku clucking," and I will be using that term from now on.
Anyone else?
Oh, they were so cute too. It's so sad.
Yeah.
It was a really bloody sad episode.
It really
Yeah.
was.
It was a really, really sad episode.
And it was so.
Are they gonna die? And you could see like Michael K. Williams, his performance was amazing. Just the physical terror that he was feeling, returning. And it just took Atticus such a long time to glom onto that. And I don't understand why you thought, why wouldn't he drink before you're asking him to relive one of the most harrowing experiences of his life, the most harrowing experience of his life. And you've said, I've heard this story so many times, and it made me sad that there was nobody really comforting him and holding his hand through this process.
Yeah.
It was, I mean, he was shaking with terror. It was amazing. It was amazing.
It was amazing.
That history again, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I just another real quick thing though. I mean, I think I would hate for us to leave and not talk about the use of Sonia Sanchez's poem in this episode.
Yep.
Especially, the line where she says, "Here's my hand, catch the fire and live, 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 live." Right? I mean, that was just.
Yeah.
I think that was the again for me, the spiritual and the supernatural coming together, because we switched to that right as Grandmother Hattie is doing the Lord's Prayer, right? And then we go into Sonia Sanchez's poem. And I think that's a beautiful transition, but also a beautiful way to link that. But I think those two realms together, right?
Yeah. Because there is that stanza, which I think you're absolutely right, and it does bring this theme of survival. Really, it comes full circle. She says, "Can't you smell it coming from our past? The fire of living, not dying. The fire of loving, not killing. The fire of blackness, not gangster shadows. Where is your beautiful fire that gives light to the world? The fire of pyramids, the fire that burned through the holes of slave ships and made us breathe." I mean, it was amazing, and I think tonight we should end with "Catch Your Fire."
I was gonna say "Gotcha, Kid."
Ouch. We 50. Hold on. I'm trying to figure out which one to write down here. Catch Your Fire.
Or "I Gotcha, Kid." Both very good.
Woo.
I Gotcha, Kid.
But the poetry in the show, in every episode, has just been so on point.
Mm-hmm.
Not even just the poetry, just the use of spoken word and how they play audio in this program has been masterful.
Yeah, all the different speeches that they kind of play on the overlay. It's been great.
All right. So that about wraps it up for tonight's episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. Brothers and sisters, please tell the audience where they can find you on social media, and we shall start with Stanford.
You can find me on Facebook and Twitter at SW Carpenter.
Excellent. Vanessa?
You can find me on Facebook and Twitter at Dr. Vanessa Hintz, and on Instagram at Dr. Vanessa Hintz. I don't know why I said it like a question.
Excellent. No, that works. And Cianna?
You can find me on Twitter at CC Greaves. That's CICIGREAV as in Victor, ES as in Sam. I say this every week. I've only had a couple of takers. Follow me. I follow back.
Fantastic. Byron?
You can find me on Twitter at Byron B. Craig, and on Instagram at Byron Steve, and on Facebook.
Excellent. Leandra?
Yes!
Leandra?
Sorry. You can find me on Twitter at Parris Leandra at PARRISLEANDRA, or on Instagram at Leandra Parris, or on Facebook Leandra Parris.
Excellent. I'm Scott Jordan. You can find me on Twitter at dark_loops. You can find all episodes of the Seers of Ardham at the Dark Loops Productions channel on YouTube. If you'd like to leave feedback about this podcast or anything we've talked about, please leave it below on this YouTube channel or send a message to darkloopsproductions@gmail.com. We'll be sure to read it at the end of our next podcast. So there it is, from all of us to all of you. Big hugs, and remember, I got you,
Gotcha, kid.
Bye-bye.
Vote on November 3rd.
You don't need no reason to travel. Unknown horrors leaving in plain sight. Oh, God, stealing pain drives the world insane. Turn that evil darkness to healing.